Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Conlon, and I will be your worship partner today. I'd like to welcome you to Westminster. So our guest today, I'm happy to say, is the Reverend Dr. Clyde Grubbs. He's a Unitarian Universalist minister who has served congregations in Indiana, Quebec, Massachusetts, Texas, Florida, and California. He's a practicing spiritual director, and Clyde honors his family's Texas Cherokee traditions, which inform his spiritual understanding and practice and his anti-racist understanding. Very happy to have Clyde with us today. And so now I'm going to get my chalice, which is the beginning of our worship service. And I'm going to light my chalice, and I invite you to do the same. If you like, you can use the name, you can use the chat to post the name of the street where you live, where the chalice was lit. Our chalice lighting reading is from Winona LaDuke, like tributaries to a river. Across the continent, on the shores of small tributaries, hard to say in the shadows of sacred mountains, on the vast expanse of the prairies, or in the safety of the woods, prayers are being repeated, as they have for thousands of years, and common people with uncommon courage and the whispers of their ancestors in their ears continue their struggles to protect the land and water and trees on which their very existence is based. And like small tributaries joining together to form a mighty river, their force and power grows. This river will not be dammed. Let us join in the struggle for this earth, for the waters, and the air.
For the
Now we will share our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service our mission. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
I'm going to tell a story, and the story is a Cherokee creation stories, all strung together because they were people would tell little stories, and when people who lived here for 10,000 years would tell these stories to explain things. They would tell how something happened. Maybe a child would come up and say, "How did this world come to be? How did the squirrels come to run around and all that?" So this is a story about how the world was made a long, long time ago, when everything one could see below the clouds and below the sky was just water, water everywhere. All the animals that existed lived up in the clouds. Up in the clouds is they would live, and it was very crowded. All the animals wanted more room, and it was not much privacy up in the clouds. So all the animals began to wonder what was below the water. All they could see below the clouds is water, and what was below the water? So at last, Beaver's grandchild, little water beetle, offered to go and find out. Water beetle went down onto the surface of the water and darted up and down across the surface of the water, but could find no place to rest. There was no land at all, nothing to stand on, just water. Then water beetle dived to the bottom of the water and brought up some soft mud. This began to grow and to spread out in all sides until it became land in every direction. At first, the earth was flat and soft and wet. We call that mud. The animals were anxious to get down out of the clouds, but it was just mud. The birds flew down every now and then to see if it was yet dry, but it was muddy, too muddy to live on. After a long time, they sent down Buzzard and told Buzzard to go up and down and make the wings flap down, up and down on the surface, and see if the wind from the wings would dry out the land. Now, this was the great Buzzard, the father of all buzzards we see now. And Buzzard flew all over the earth, low down near the ground, and when it was still soft. And when he reached the Smoky Mountains, he was very tired, and his wings began to flap and strike the ground. And whenever they struck the earth, there was a valley. And when the wings turned upward again, there was a mountain. The first plants and animals finally came down from the clouds, but to bless their new home, they needed to watch and keep awake for 7 nights it was a ceremony, to stay awake and to observe everything for 7 nights. And that would bless the home that they were now making on the ground, on the earth, on the mountains and valleys and rivers. Now, the first night, every animal and every plant stayed awake. Every animal and every plant was able to stay awake the first night. Then the next night, several dropped to sleep. The third night, more went to sleep. And at last, on the 7th night, only the owl, the panther, and 1 or 2 more were still awake. Therefore, to these who had stayed awake for 7 nights, they earned the power to see in the dark and to go about as if it were the day. All the other animals, all the others have to sleep at night because They couldn't stay awake. Now, even some of the trees went to sleep. It's only the cedar, the pine, the spruce, the holly, and the laurel were awake all 7 nights. Therefore, they are always green. They are also the sacred trees. But all the other trees, it was said, because you did not stay awake, therefore you shall lose your hair every winter. Two-legged ones, the two-legged ones are the we're familiar with because that's us. The two-legged ones came along much later, and therefore they are the least experienced creatures in all creation. If a two-legged one do not learn from the creatures that were here before, they will make many stupid mistakes and cause much mischief. So we, the two-legged ones, should be humble and open to learning from our relatives. And that's the story of how we got to be this way. There's a haunting scene in Zora Neale Hurston's important novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. One afternoon, the protagonist Janie sees Seminole Indians passing through the swamp headed east. The Seminole warn that a hurricane is coming, but no one believes the Seminole. They just yell at them. Dumb Indians, dumb Indians. That night, the great Okeechobee hurricane struck, killing over 3,000 people in what remains one of the most devastating recorded natural disasters in the history of this place. The Seminole had read the tall grasses in the swamps near Lake Okeechobee, where the lake opens up to that river of grass we call the Everglades. They observed the seed pods swell and pop open, and they began to leave the area, moving to higher ground. The Seminole said the tall grass had spoken to them. From generations of experience living in Florida, they had learned how the ecology behaved and how the flora responded to different weather patterns. That experience allowed them to know that a hurricane was coming. And their experience with hurricanes convinced them to evacuate to higher ground. This was 1928. 1928, before Doppler radar and mathematical models, which is how our scientific culture predicts storms. They had no instruments, no computers, but they did have indigenous wisdom. They had what might be called Seminole science. In the prairies west of the Missouri River, the Caddo and Wichita people built very large houses made out of grass with cedar frames and low to the ground and baked clay. Seen from a distance, they might be taken for a mound. Some of the structures were big enough to host a whole village for the dance ceremonies and games, through which the community celebrated the sacred and enjoyed themselves in community. The grass houses were both breathable and waterproof. The Wichita peoples lived in the prairie for generations, and they experienced all kinds of weathers in that open environment. They knew about the blizzard snows and the relentless sun of the summer, and they knew that the prairies could see tornadoes. Those big houses stood up to the tornadoes. Those big houses stood and resisted being crushed by the snow. And they learned from their environment and built a sustainable relationship. They built a way to live with the prairie. They did not go to architectural school. They did not they just basically had a traditional knowledge, indigenous wisdom. The wisdom informed them that they were building to be part of the prairie. Be part of the prairie when you build those houses. Be with the prairie, not against the prairie. They practiced Caddo in Wichita science. So we heard from Florida, we've heard from Nebraska and Kansas. Let us move even still further west. Few people know that Phoenix, Arizona, and its surrounding suburbs sits one of the most extensive and sophisticated irrigation systems in the world. I'm not talking about the present water robbing system that has been set up in the desert over the last century. No, I'm talking about the systems that were built by the Hoboken people 2 centuries before the slave trader Columbus got lost in the Bahamas, where he and his crew were discovered by the Taino people. The Hoboken irrigation system was a major engineering feat. The canal system dates from the 5th and 6th centuries of the Common Era. And the building continued for hundreds and hundreds of years. Thousands of miles of waterways were constructed, water tens of thousands of acres of crops, and the water was returned to the rivers throughout the project. The Hoboken people learned from their surroundings and built a viable technology that arose out of nature, and they continued building and building to the point that they began to work against the river. By the 12th century of the Common Era, they had overbuilt. Their complex had become unsustainable. The Hoboken civilization collapsed when it lost touch with the relationship to its environment, when it became arrogant to its accomplishments and began to ignore its own ancient wisdom. The Hoboken people no longer exist as a people. They went the way of other urbanized cultures and peoples who ceased to listen to their mother, the earth. They did not live within the limits imposed by the desert and the river and the mountains that surround that valley. They forgot the practices that had given their culture life in the first place. For most of the time that human beings have lived on this planet, people have paid attention to the earth. They have lived in a place. They provided for their needs by knowledge of that particular environment. They learned by experience how to create sustainable economies. And by living in harmony with Mother Earth, they revealed her secrets to them in that place over time. Let me repeat this whole idea in other words. Indigenous wisdom is particular to a location, to a place, to the wisdom of the people who have lived in that place and learned by experience to create a sustainable way of life, and the knowledge that comes from practices over time. The ancient medical understanding of my ancestors, the Cherokee people, was based on observing this herb does provide relief for poison ivy, and this one doesn't. Excuse me. This herb provides relief for poison ivy. This one doesn't. But don't chew it. Don't drink it in a tea. No. Make a balm out of it and rub it on the rash. Rub it on the rash. Medicine women kept the knowledge and trained their daughters, and the body of knowledge grew over time. They say that most of the pharmacology today owes its formulas and potence to ancient herbalists, Europe, Asia, Africa, the Western Hemisphere, ancient herbalists whose treatments were often as effective as we know today. And now we're coming to understand the health of Native Americans before the European invasion was excellent. They did not suffer from diabetes, as much cancer or heart attacks. Their diets were mostly vegetables, beans, greens, squashes, and whole grains. They got plenty of exercise and lived long lives compared to other societies. And they didn't eat just one food. They had dozens of varieties of maize, corn, other grains, dozens of varieties of legumes, fruits, greens. Today, our commercialized agriculture has greatly reduced the choices. So unless you adventure into a Whole Foods or pay a premium or live near an organic farmer's market, the food is quite circumscribed. I've seen supermarkets with maybe 10 varieties of vegetables. The variety is limited and it does not supply human nutritional needs. American agriculture products are full of toxins. Our meats are full of antibiotics and growth hormones. And all this isn't just about us. It's not just about our health. The way our food is grown and brought to us is destroying the soil, the water resources, and just the ecology of animals, including insects that live in that soil. Our food system is not sustainable. Many Unitarian Universalists agree that we experience a whole group of crises beyond pandemics, crises that have to do with the destruction of our earth. Now, we've been taught about those crises over time. We've talked about those crises, but we think sometimes that the crisis is the crisis of the atmosphere, the crisis of the water table. I'm inviting you to consider that the crisis is us, our human relationship to our life-sustaining environment in which we live, in which we move, in which we have our being is profoundly alien to who we were evolved to be as creatures. Our culture's relationship to nature is deeply contrary to nature, both the nature out there and the nature who is us. And at the same time, we are part of nature. We've been taught to call the crisis of our relationship by various names: global warming, climate change, water resource depletion, species extinction, expansion of the deserts, acidic buildup of our oceans, ozone layer destruction, acid rain, deforestation, soil erosion, water and atmosphere pollution, just to name a few. And of course, we have the crisis of world hunger and commercialization of agriculture and the crisis of diet and health. Our media and our politicians treat all these critical problems in isolation. We are taught that they are discrete problems with discrete graduate schools, perhaps, to study each discrete problem. And the solutions are all discrete. Take this pill for the heart and spend lots of money on this technology to solve the climate problem. And all of those kinds of solutions are technological and isolationist. I'm inviting you to consider that the crisis of ecology is a profound spiritual malady. We're not dealing with a series of isolated problems. The crisis arises out of a profound brokenness, a profound alienation of who we are as human beings. We have forgotten. We have forgotten that we belong to the earth, that the earth does not belong to us. I'm sure you've heard those words. It's in our hymnal under the saying by Noah Seath, Chief Seattle, as they call him. And we say it perhaps during Native American Heritage Month, as a responsive reading. But we don't live by those words. We don't live as if the earth does not belong to us and we belong to the earth. We do not live that way because it would require a profound reorientation of our lives. Our economy, our social practice, and our politics are all premised on the idea that the earth is a thing, our thing, to manipulate and violate as we will. If we believe that our earth is a thing and it belongs to us, we might believe that the problem with our ecology is technological and can be solved by maybe going to Mars, as one prominent millionaire says. Go to Mars. We can solve the problem with techniques, with hybrid cars, with windmills, with fluorescent light bulbs. Now, all those things are good things, but they don't address the root problem. If we come to live in this simple but profound reorientation, we can reclaim our human relationship to the earth. We learn something of being in relationship, being of the earth, by listening. Listening. The indigenous understanding that we belong to the earth leads to a deep appreciation that we stand on the shoulders of every human being that has gone before, that our ancestors live on in us, their wisdom informs us, and we probe the choices we make and the work they did and the knowledge they accumulate as we suffer from their mistakes and their mistakes and their missteps. Therefore, in every decision we make, we must consider the generations that come after us, just as we must consider the generations that went before us. We must ponder this earth that they will belong to. And we must come to know in our depths, in our mind, in our body, and in our spirit, that yes, we belong to the earth. That must become an awakening chant of our bodies. We belong to the earth. We will also come to live in the awareness of our surroundings, the place we inhabit. We live in relationship that what has been and what will become in every moment of our now. This, I believe, our renewed humanity will heal our earth, and our earth will heal our humanity. May it be so. May it be so. Let us join singing Love Will Guide Us, number 131, Love Will Guide Us.
Love will guide us, peace has dried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from free to giving. Love will guide us through the hard life. If you cannot sing
Remember as you leave this virtually gathered community, remember that we are all made as the same stuff. It's the same stuff as the stars, that we're all connected and intimately related to the eternity of all that is and all that ever will be. So may you be blessed with the spirit of life, which is love, with the aspirations of this community, which is based on hope, with the possibilities made whole through witness and practice. Go in peace. Walk in joy. Amen.